Hey guys, and welcome to your intro video for Page Marine Cruise. I'm Amanda, and I wanted to create this video as sort of an FAQ to watch and get some info from when it comes to frequently asked questions prior to your cruise ship interview. So let's get into it. What we're going to do is what to expect for your first interview. So initially, many of you will have an initial interview with myself via Skype. And I'm going to talk a little bit later in the video about sort of the whole interview process, but obviously you're watching this before a Skype interview. Let's talk about contracts. So for almost every single cruise ship position that we hire for primarily, most contracts on board are 6 months on with 2 months off for vacation. For the most part, you are not paid by the cruise line whilst on vacation. So just keep that in mind. And there are some options sometimes to extend your leave or shorten your leave, but for the most part, you're going to be 6 months on, 2 months off. If you're applying for an officer, supervisor, manager role, sometimes those contracts can be 4 months on, 2 months off. And then we also do have some seasonal positions available. For example, seasonal youth activity staff with Princess. Those contracts can be anywhere from 2 to 12 weeks. That's really the only seasonal role that we have. We do also, of course, do some hiring with Princess Cruises affiliate line, which is P&O Australia. And for that line, we do some youth security hires. Those contracts typically are 4 months on, 2 months off. So with regards to flights, all of the cruise lines that we work with pay for your flights right from day one to the ship and back again for all of your contracts. And actually these days that's an oddity. There's a lot of cruise lines out there that when a crew member first joins, they actually require you to pay your own flight initially and then will only pay you back after the fact. With all of the lines we work with, they pay your way right from day one, which is just awesome. Of course, your uniforms are also provided with the exception of uniform shoes. And later on in the process, when you're actually like getting offers for contract and you're dealing with your administrator at head office in Los Angeles for Princess and P&O Australia, they'll let you know more about the shoes. But for the most part, really the whole uniform is provided with the exception of shoes. And as with all cruise lines, room and board is provided, of course, so your accommodation and all your food is also provided in addition to your pay. So with regards to your pay, if you're working with Princess Cruises, you're going to be paid in USD. If you're working with P&O Australia, you're going to be paid in Australian dollars. If you are new to the cruise industry and you've never been on a cruise ship before and you're coming into an entry-level role, typically you should be probably expecting somewhere in the 1,200 to 1,800 USD range, most likely. Obviously, each contract you do based upon your evaluations, that monthly salary will go up. And of course, if you're coming in at a supervisor, manager, or officer level range, typically you're going to be starting in the 25 to 4 USD range per month. If you're working with P&O Australia, again, you're going to be paid in Australian dollars. And so if you're youth security, we'll discuss more about that in your interview. So where do you go? I get this question a lot during interviews, so I thought I would answer it before you even meet me. So with Princess, they have over 18 ships right now. P&O Australia, much smaller company, only about 4 or 5. So in essence, your first contract, the cruise line sends you where you're needed. So that could be anywhere. You don't have a choice your first contract. If you are new and you've never been on a ship before, you tend to kind of be sent to a bigger ship with a larger team for more support. And those bigger ships tend to be, usually the Caribbean, or if it's the summertime, Alaska. And then once you've completed a contract or two, then there is more space to request specific ships which are associated with specific itineraries. So Princess sails to over 290 ports around the world. So later, there's definitely a ton of choice when it comes to later contracts to the Mediterranean, the Baltic, South Pacific, etc. P&O Australia really kind of stays within the South Pacific area. You'll either be joining typically in Australia or New Zealand and doing the South Pacific. Those guys kind of stay there. When it comes to documents that you'll need prior to your departure, hopefully you already have a valid passport. For most of you, that's going to be a Canadian passport, and that needs to have at least 6 months left on it when you use it. With regards to visas, if you're working with Princess as a Canadian, you do not require any additional visas. Americans and Canadians do not require any visas to work with Princess. However, if you're in any other nationality, you'll need what's called a C1D visa, which you can get from the American consulate once you're further on in the process. But for most Canadians and Americans here, you won't need to worry about that. If you are going to be working with P&O Australia, prior to departure, you will need to obtain an ETA and MCV visa. An ETA is an Electronic Travel Authority visa, which will allow you to enter Australia to join your ship. And then the MCV is a Maritime Crew visa, which allows you to work on board a ship in Australian waters. So both of those can be easily obtained online if you're Canadian. And one of them is $20 and one of them is free. I'm trying to remember which, but you won't be doing that until further on in the process, until you've actually gone through your interview process, you've been offered a contract and you've accepted contract, and you're actually requested either by myself or more likely your administrator at head office to actually go ahead and get that started. When it comes to the other two documents that you'll need, and this is the case with almost any major cruise line out there, they will require a criminal records check and a medical check. The criminal records check for Canadian applicants is done by a company in Canada called Profile Screening. They're based out of Toronto. All of their forms I provide you online, so it's super simple. The criminal records check with Princess and P&O Australia is good for a 1-year period. And unfortunately, if you've had a prior criminal records check, we can't use it. Princess and P&O Australia only accept criminal records check from this one company, and it has to be done within 30 to 60 days of your departure, so it can't be old. And so that is a $50 fee that goes directly to Profile Screening. And again, this is not something that you do until you've had your interview, you've been accepted for employment, and you've been provided with offer of contract, and you've gotten back and confirmed that. So again, I'm going through all the documents that you need later on down the road. The medical check, and this is the case for all major cruise lines, is what all cruise lines require because they do cover you medically while you're working on board. So they want to make sure that you're in good physical condition prior to joining. So in Canada, for Princess, they use a company called Medicis. There's usually about 2 to 5 doctors that are certified per major city. The cost is typically $200 to $500. There is a range because each doctor charges a private amount, so they kind of pick their own amount. Pros and cons to that. It is a bit steep your first time out, but it is good for a 2-year period. So the medical is good for multiple contracts. And really when it comes to the industry standard right now, that number is very much on par with the other major brands' medical requirements. So in essence, just think about it like a 2-year travel insurance, in essence. So we do recommend you keep your own medical going for when you're home on leave, because the company does not cover you medically when you're home on leave, but when you're on the ship, that pre-employment medical is what covers you. I recommend once you're at that stage in the process, so again, the medical is not something that you do until you've been accepted, until you've been offered contract and you've accepted contract, and your administrator at Princess LA head office, and it will be the same administrator for P&O Australia actually tells you to go ahead and do that. So that is about the medical. Now, again, as I was saying, to make it as cheap as possible, what you could do is just make sure all your own vaccinations are up to date as much as possible. You can usually do that through your own doctor. And yeah, and also calling all of the numbers that your administrator provides to you. Again, there'll be usually typically multiple doctors. So go through the list, call each of them. They all charge slightly different amounts. So I definitely recommend checking with all of their amounts, and then you can make an informed decision thereafter. A little side tip, guys, for P&O Australia, and this isn't a guarantee and it's definitely not been confirmed, but from what I've been hearing from our youth security candidates on board with P&O Australia, if you do keep your receipts, sometimes the crew office will reimburse you for the medical and criminal, so far as I've heard. That is not the case with Princess at this point, but for P&O Australia, it might be. But again, really the only positions we're moving forward with right now with P&O Australia are youth security. When it comes to your interview with me, so what will we be doing? We will meet, we will chat for about 15 or 20 minutes. I'll be filling in some forms for you on my end, providing some answers to some more questions if you have them, going through the openings and what we might be having coming up. And then after you meet with me, I maybe sending you some additional materials to get back to me. If I do that, depending on your position, I'll send you an email with a whole bunch of links, and they'll all be Dropboxed links to different forms, such as application forms and questionnaires and things like that. And then I'll also be creating for you your own individual Dropbox if that's the case. And then you'll be putting all those completed forms into there. Once I have all of that, I will be processing your file directly with operations in LA for both Princess and P&O Australia. And typically, if they're interested in progressing, they will let me know within 3 to 7 business days. They typically will CC me on an email of invitation for a secondary interview. And that's not the case with all positions. Some of our positions won't require a secondary interview after mine. Some of them may. So just keep that in mind. And then once you've had your secondary interview, if you require one, you'll typically find out whether or not you've been accepted within 7 to 10 business days. That acceptance will come via email. So do make sure you check your spam and your trash, because the Princess server is so massive that sometimes that first email does end up in your spam or trash. So do check that over that time period. It will come not from a Princess email, funnily enough, it'll come from an HA group email. It'll be the person's name and HA group. That's because Princess is underneath an umbrella of cruise lines. There's Carnival Corporation, there's Holland America Group, which includes Princess, P&O Australia, Seabourn. So don't be surprised if that's the case, because all of the emails now have the HA group in them. Then you'll receive your acceptance, fingers crossed, and at that stage in the game, you'll read through the contract, fill out the form, send it back to the HR rep that sent them to you in head office, and that'll be your acceptance of contract. I usually get CC'd on that email, and then I know to trigger the criminal records checks forms and start to get you started on that. Once your criminal records check is done, and it's very, very quick through Profile, I send you the forms, you send them back to me, and then once I process it online with them, it's typically only 24 to 48 hours. I then put that in with Princess head office, and at that point, your administrator will get in contact with you within usually 3 to 7 business days about getting started on your pre-employment medical check. Once that's booked, and usually it takes about a week or 2 to get in to see a doctor to get that done. Once that's booked and done and you've sent a copy to your administrator, your whole file will get moved over to a scheduler, and you'll actually be scheduled to join your first ship, where they'll start talking to you about that. So really, from the day of your first interview to actually joining a ship, it can be anywhere from a 30 to 90-day process. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes it's shorter, sometimes it's longer. It just kind of depends on the availability and what's sort of happening. But yes, if you need a little bit longer or a little bit shorter, that's fine. Let us know that during your first interview. I'll be asking you about availability. And if you say immediately, that's great. However, be careful with that, because there have been instances where someone said they're available immediately and a ship really, really needs someone, and they may ask you to join like 4 days later. So if you're truly not available immediately, that's totally fine. Just let me know. And the cruise lines hire almost 365 days of the year, with the exception of December 8th to about January 8th. So if you need a bit more time, or you have a wedding that you have to be at, please just let us know that in your initial interview so that I can put your availability more accurately, and they much more appreciate that than offering you a ship and then you can't go, even though you said you're available immediately. So be careful with that, please. I think I've covered everything. You know, PMC has been around for over 30 years now. We've been doing recruitment for a very, very long time as part of this company with multiple cruise lines. And really what our job is to see you and to help you through the whole process for joining your first ship. Once you have done your first contract, really you deal primarily with your administrator at head office with the main cruise line. But we are here as your touch point to help you through the process, through all the stages, and just make sure that you have exactly what you need to have and you know exactly what you need to know before you join that first ship and walk up the gangway. And we're just wanting to make that process as easy and as simple as possible and as clear for you as we can. So thanks so much, guys, for watching this video. I look forward to meeting you soon, and we'll see you then.